right? With the construction of the neoliberal global globalization capitalist order from Bretton Woods on up. But we saw the U.S.-led Western global hegemony rise to hyperpower status, right, to a unipolar world order briefly after the self-dissolution of the Soviet Union, and then the resurgence of Russia and the rise of China on the other end of it, and U.S., however slowly, but declining in relative terms, economic and military strength against not only Russia and China, but a slowly rising rest of the world. And people in the U.S. have, they've been talking about this. They see this decline. They see the global flows of capital shift from west to east as their own companies, right, take advantage of the global system, neoliberal economic system they created. They go in search of cheap labor, to make money. It's their own fault. They created this system, and then, they don't like the results of it. And where economic strength goes, inevitably military strength will follow, right? Even if there's a lag time between them, in relative terms, compared to Russia and China, the U.S. military is getting weaker. All you have to do is look at shipbuilding construction. Chinese shipbuilding construction is 275 times the capacity of the United States right now, right? So there's a realization of this, right? With the decline in relative economic strength, inevitably results in a decline of relative military strength and a decline then of political strength, to dictate political terms around the world. And the Trump administration has obviously come up with radical solutions, right, to solve this problem, right? To get the rest of the world to pay for hegemony and primacy, seemingly sometimes contradictory to shift to a managed world of great power competitions where the U.S. claims greater control over the Western Hemisphere, right? All being forced on the rest of the world rather than renegotiated with this unilaterally declared tariff war against the rest of the world. So the solution is obviously not going to succeed. I don't think anyone seriously believes that. I don't even know how many people in the Trump administration believe that. And what is happening is you are seeing this decline, this relative U.S. decline in economic, military, and political terms accelerate as a result of Trump's attempted solution, right? At least as I hesitate to give the Trump administration, the term a grand strategic vision. I think that's stretching, giving them a little more credit. But whatever that vision was, or visions, or vague ideas, are obviously not working, and that's only accelerating. Now, again, don't think this is all going to happen overnight and the U.S. dollar is going to be gone in 3 months or something like that. The U.S. is still going to be first and equal in a number of measures for a number of years, but everything is just accelerating that relative decline.
The share of global GDP for the United States has just plummeted since it was nearly half or more than half. There's debate on that after World War II. Now it's coming very, very close to that 20% mark. China will eventually overtake. Biden in 1997, when he said this about Russia and having to turn to China, it was almost like he was predicting this ultimate
predicting his
response.
own political demise.
Where do they go? I had one interesting comment. Our conversation was Zaganoff, was repeated with Lebed. They talked about they don't want this NATO expansion. They know it's not in their security interest and on, and said, well, and if you do that, we may have to look to China. And I couldn't help using the colloquial expression from my state by saying to Zaganoff, lots of luck in your senior year. Good luck. And if that doesn't work, try Iran. And I'm serious. I said that to them, and these were, and they know, I knew, they knew, everybody knew.
If for some reason one of the two parties makes it very difficult, we're just going to say you're foolish, you're fools, you're horrible people, and we're going to just take a pass. But hopefully we won't have to do that. And Marco's right in saying we're
that's right, Donald.
See it end. Think of it. Every day, a lot of people are being killed.
The way he just said that, it doesn't really ooze.
Every day you're
strength.
killing people in Yemen and Gaza too. I guess those aren't beautiful people.
No.
Ukrainians are, more white or something. I guess, that's the idea. That's right. That's right, Donald. Take a hike. They just walk away, buddy. Just walk away, right? It's, we've all seen those videos of the big guys walking through the streets and positioning each other as they try to walk by each other. And, Trump is turning to the side as Russia and China and Iran walk arm in arm through that gap. And Biden, lots of luck in your senior years, buddy. I hope you have a coherent thought before the end and come to regret the attitude that led to that dismissive hubris towards Russia, China, and Iran. Because as a leading member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, you helped solidify that. You helped push Russia and China and Iran together, three very different countries with very different cultures and political systems, out of your own hubris and attempt to hold on to control the rest of the world. So thanks for that, Joe. Thanks. Seriously. I'm quite sincerely. I thank Joe Biden for bringing Russia, China, and Iran together like that.
Then on the other side, Donald Trump saying they're all horrible people. He's talking about Russia and, of course, probably even Zelensky in Ukraine if they don't come to a peace deal. But it was the United States, right? Like in both of these situations, it's the U.S. saying we are the dictator here. We dictate terms. And in both cases, whether it's Biden saying this will never happen, we'll never end up in a situation where Russia goes on an independent path and links up with China and Iran. Donald Trump is saying, well, it's like the hubris of it. It's like, well, no, we'll walk away from the very conflict that they started. They
started, right? And that he certainly had a hand in leading up to whatever he may claim. Trump is attempting to dictate terms right now, militarily to Russia, to India, to Iran on their nuclear program, and almost certainly, the support of the axis of resistance, and economically to China, all at the same time. And he doesn't get to dictate terms. There can be negotiation, but you are not the God Emperor. The U.S. the unipolar moment is over. You yourself have admitted that, right? Then you sit down and negotiate, if not as equals, then as people with degrees of strength against each other, rather than this mafia-style bluster and ridiculousness and attempting to dictate terms overnight, because it's not going to get you any results that you want.
And we had a really good question from a Patreon member. He asked, I've been waiting impatiently for independent states, especially for Russia and China, to quote unquote weaponize US dollar debt as a lever against the empire of chaos. Are they holding back because it's effectively a nuclear option, or is it purely strategic decision-making to hold back and strike when the empire is more vulnerable? Both you and I, Mark, share the sentiment that it's a very good thing Russia, China, and Iran are much stronger in building these deep ties together. But now there's this question, I think, of orientation and direction and what they do and how they decide to maneuver. What do you make of this question?
It's not a bad question. I'm not an economic expert. Let's be clear about that. International relations, security studies, we're talking, macro geoeconomics here. But my 2 rubles, for what it's worth, is that things aren't quite so cut and dried, right? Obviously, Russia and China and Iran, particularly Russia over the last few years, has been forced to move away from use of the dollar to, nearly completely by the U.S. sanctions war, right? And now between all of these countries, we see that they mostly trade in each other's currencies. They trade in complicated barter systems, whatever. They avoid use of the dollar with each other. Now, if we're talking specifically dollar holdings, I think you will probably, if you take a look, you'll see that China has been increasing its divestment of the dollar quite considerably. Not just in the most recent months, which is accelerating, but, over time. But China plays a long game, right? And the US dollar still is the global reserve currency. There is no alternative as a global currency. Countries can increasingly trade with each other in their own currencies and own goods, which is what BRICS is designed to facilitate. But the U.S. is right. There's a lot of burdens that come with the global reserve currency. Really, you have to run export deficits, right? Which China certainly isn't willing to do, right? So an alternative to the dollar may not be a dollar substitute. It may be a more fractured, with countries dealing with each other's currencies, dealing with cryptocurrencies, dealings with barter systems, right, around. And China is moving towards alternatives and divesting, but at, as you yourself suggested, a strategic pace, because besides just Russia and China and Iran and other countries and BRICS and everything, the rest of the world still does use the dollar. And no one wants to see a global depression. No one wants to see the collapse of global trade everywhere. So, it's a bit like chemotherapy, right? You don't want to kill the patient with the cure, right? It has to be done in moderation. It's not a nuclear option. It isn't. There is no nuclear option there, not unless if you're ready for economic Armageddon. But there is a strategic moving away from it that does increase that relative economic, military, political decline of the United States, like we discussed earlier.
I think at the broader political, geopolitical side, Russia, China, and Iran, I think all are in agreement. And I think especially Russia and China, the biggest of the powers, the multipolar world leaders, I think they understand that they're not really dealing with a kind of a rational actor, as our friend Brian Berletic would say, that an offensive posture actually toward the United States actually leads to nothing but almost the scenario that you laid out economically. It will lead to it militarily. So a lot of, I feel like, what Russia and China and even Iran's, you mentioned buying time earlier, I think a lot of how they operate on the world stage is to it's not about placating the United States. There's no need to, there's no reason. It really is about navigating the world with an empire in decline that is ready and willing to do very unthinkable things that, you wouldn't ever consider a Russia or a China to ever do unless it was completely backed against the wall. For example, like nuclear war or even a kinetic conflict that could lead to nuclear war. So that's kind of how I see it is. They're not going to do anything that, yes, will harm the rest of the world, because that is against their interests too. And also, the benefits of going on an offensive posture, which neither of these countries have that political system that warrants them to do that. Still, the benefits do not outweigh the costs, for sure. But
Putin is a judo master, right? He's a judo black belt. He knows how to avoid a clumsy blow from an opponent and then use that opponent's own strength against it. It's a kind of, shall we say, passive aggressive resistance, right? And that's you summarized it actually, better than I've said, is that Russia and China and Iran are doing their best to manage the hegemon's decline without giving a moment for a Götterdämmerung, end conflict that does too much damage, right? Russia and the U.S. just came really, really close to that.
Really close,
right?
really.
But I mean, with Biden firing ballistic missiles into Russia,
and the Oreshniks and all that, yes.
Russia showed restraint and let Biden wear himself out, and Trump, whatever chaos bomb he is, at least showing a little bit more rationality or at least cognizance, right, on how close to World War III the two countries were. Similarly, China and Iran are also. Let the hegemon stumble around and flail against them strategically, avoid any big conflict while the U.S. still does have significant military force, because in 10 years' times, after 10 more years of relative decline, the U.S. won't even be able to dream of taking on China in the West Pacific. Right, and will not be able to compete with Russia on a battlefield in Europe, right? And Iran will be more, an impregnable fortress against long-range strikes. That's what they're doing, right? Don't give the U.S. that big conflict that many of the death wish that many of the neocons, have some type of fixation, some type of obsession for. Let them stumble around and tire themselves out as the hegemon slowly shuffles off the stage. It's best to avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, where are those attackums now, Mark? Those attackums that were launching into Russia. Then, of course, Russia had the Oreshnik launch, but Russia just allowed them to all be intercepted and to just kind of fly away. Now,
60-70%.
No more.
Took a few hits from the chin, and the problem is over. And as Jake Sullivan admitted, having no operational effect.
Yeah. So, in that sense, I think you're exactly right about this, because I have some of my viewers, and they followed, for example, 20th century Cold War. They saw a lot of people, Vietnam, other places, fighting hard back by necessity against the U.S. Expansionism and empire and hegemony. But at the same time, that was all by necessity. And then you have now a reality here where the U.S. is in a completely different position in its life stage as an empire, and you can't expect good things to happen from what I would call like adventurism on the part of countries that they are preparing for war. We talk about this all the time. They are preparing for an unthinkable war or wars that the United States has planning or in here or happening already. So they are preparing for that. China, Russia, Iran, they all are really focusing on defense, but that's what it is. It's defense, because to go on the offense against an empire, despite all the moral reasons for why you might want to do that, Gaza, etc., it would be more destabilizing in an already a very destabilizing, chaotic world than it would be beneficial. And I think that sometimes is hard to hear for some people.
No. I mean, there's something to that, right? The U.S. has been a big global bully for a long time. And, there's a gut reaction in people to want some type of immediate result of Russia to put a military smackdown on the U.S. and show them what's what. For China to put an economic smackdown on the U.S. and show what's what, right? For Iran and the axis of resistance to go on the offensive against Israel and so forth, right? That's thinking in Hollywood terms, right? You want some type of immediate justice, right? But the truth is that, particularly leaders in Russia and China and increasingly Iran think in longer, more rational, more level-headed terms than that, right? And it's probably better, because there's been enough times in this conflict where I've been like, oh, God damn, hit him.
Yeah, right.
Send the Oreshniks,
it's only been
right?
3 years, Mark. It's only been over 3 years.
Putin is more pragmatic, more cold-blooded, more rational than I am, and we should all be grateful for it. Russia and China, they have a plan, right? And for the things they don't have a plan for, they have a rational way of coming up with a plan for. Trust in that. It won't give you the big, sexy, immediate, emotional payback many times. But over the course of time, it is like we've been watching this SMO for 3 years, right? And there's always been a sense, oh, why doesn't Russia just finish it? Why can't, but the plan is working. The plan is working. The Ukrainian military is being degraded. NATO stockpiles are empty. The U.S. is backing away. It's working. Yes, it would be nice to have that emotional, immediate payback, but escape from those terms and trust in realism and pragmatism that the Russian, the Chinese, and increasingly the Iranian leaders are showing. Right? Just be calm, right? Take a nice drink and let things play out, and we'll see where they go.
Yeah, and continue to watch programs like this one, which will talk about the entire landscape. Because I get it. I still get excited when Ansarallah resists like the way they do. I am very pleased that Iran is so steadfast for the Palestinians and is able to do as much as they can to support any of the groups that are fighting back against a genocide, for example, that I wholeheartedly oppose. But then I also understand that a Russia, a China, and Iran that are able to exist and be stable and grow together is far more beneficial to all of humanity, Palestine and beyond, than what would be a very cataclysmic, I guess, a new kind of world war scenario should the United States push a button against any one of them. So that is why I think it's so important to be very realistic.
There still are limitations to what Russia, China, and Iran are capable of. And Palestine is just one of those places that falls outside the border of Russia, China, and Iran really being able to change an outcome. So I'm afraid that, at least in the short to medium term, things don't look good for Palestine, right? That humanity may win in the long term. A multipolar world may win in the long term. Palestinians are going to suffer in the short to medium term, and there's really just not anything anyone can do about it, right? And we all, when our Ansarallah, again, I've said it before, most moral people on the planet, maybe not, having to deal with the scale of planning global resistance like Russia and China, with these enormous countries do, right? But yeah, I feel a little bit of every time I see a Reaper go down as well. Yeah, I'm like, yeah, you get it. But that is, it's very human. It's very normal. It's very natural. Just, stay the course. Stay the course. Things are in motion, and no one can deny the way trends are moving. That's why Trump is attempting to shake things up so much. Yeah, right.
It's so much and everywhere
they wanted, but they're looking for a radical, outside the box solution to escape from the trap of relative decline that they see themselves in, and it's just not going to work.